Okay, well, welcome to everybody. It's lovely to see so many of you attending this evening. We're broadcasting from the UK. It's 6 o'clock in the evening here. It's now getting light. The end of winter has come, which is great. And tonight we're going to be discussing all about choosing the right oyster to circumnavigate the world. My name is Ali Smith. I'm the event director of the Oyster World Rally. I've got 30 years experience in the marine industry, and I've also raced around the world myself. I've sailed over 60,000 nautical miles, and I use my experience and expertise and that of the Oyster team to make sure that the Oyster World Rally is a success. We're just coming to the exciting conclusion of the Oyster World Rally 22-23, which finishes in Antigua in 2 weeks' time. Our oyster owners have just sailed over 27,000 nautical miles, visited 22 countries, 26 destinations, and have been at sea for over 16 months. This special webinar is all about choosing the ideal oyster to circumnavigate the world, and we're going to cover the following topics. The essential qualities of a true blue water cruiser. What is the right oyster model based on your own personal needs? When to start looking for your yacht, new or pre-owned. Useful insights on equipment and setup for your oyster, and the top 5 tips to prepare your yacht for sailing around the world. We've got some expert panelists joining us this evening, and we will have a Q&A session at the end. So if you have any questions at all, please pop them in the Q&A box and we'll get to them at the end of the session. Our experts this evening are all oyster veterans, and between us all, we've got over 100 years of oyster experience, which is quite scary. First of all, we've got Stephen Parkinson, one of our sales directors. Hi, Stephen. And also Rupert Knox-Johnston, who's head of Brokerage UK. We've got Debbie Skugel, our lead project manager. We've also got Gavin Needham, our technical support manager. And we've also got Will White, our customer support manager and oyster skipper from Newport in the USA. So welcome everybody, and thank you for taking the time to be with us this evening. And first of all, I'm going to hand over to Stephen, and off you go.
Great, thank you, Ali. So yeah, as mentioned, my name is Stephen Parkinson. I'm one of the sales directors here at Oyster Yachts. I'm just going to talk you through the new models that Oyster are currently producing. I've been at Oyster since 2002 and have helped many owners in buying their yachts, and they do all sorts of different types of sailing. So hopefully I can help give some good advice. So I guess, why are we here? Well, we're trying to ask the question, what is the best oyster to circumnavigate in? And I think the first thing I should say is that all of our yachts are capable of sailing long distance. They're designed for blue water sailing, for crossing these oceans. So the answer to that will very much depend on you and your requirements for a boat. So before I get into the detail, just a little bit about Oyster. This year, Oyster has turned 50. So we've been building boats for many, many years. And as we're about to finish this current Oyster World Rally, we will have had over 100 yachts circumnavigate. And along with many of our owners doing high latitude cruising up into the ice. So, you know, it's just fantastic for us to see these amazing adventures that our owners go on with these adventure machines that we're producing. Now, of course, over the past 50 years, we've produced circa 1,000 yachts, and we've continued to refine and finesse these models. You know, we use not only our vast experience of building boats, but also the feedback from our owners to make sure that we continually build the best possible boats that we can. And importantly, all of our yachts have to keep that oyster DNA. And that's what makes our boats these formidable blue water cruisers. So let's just have a look quickly at the range. You know, what yachts are we currently building? Well, we have 6 models in our range. They start from the Oyster 495 and go up to the 885. So that's 50 feet up to 90 feet. In meters, that's 15 meters to 27 meters. And of course, not only do they differ in size, but they differ in terms of their layout, the amount of cabins that they offer, but also importantly, the bigger the boats get, the crew element starts to come into the equation. So I'm just going to take you into the smaller boats first. Let's just talk about those. So if we look at the Oyster 495, 565 and 595, These boats tend to be our owner-driver yachts, our family boats, and these typically don't have permanent crew. And these yachts have been designed from the outset to be sailed shorthanded. So you can see that with the type of equipment that we're fitting. All those yachts come standard with in-mast furling. They all have electric winches located within the cockpit, so nobody has to leave that cockpit area when sailing. Bow and stern thrusters are available to make maneuvering nice and easy. And of course, like all of our yachts, they have big storage areas. So we have big lazarette storage in the back and big sail lockers at the front. As you go down below on these boats, what you'll find is a really social layout. So the galley has a really nice connection into the saloon. And then, of course, as with all oysters, big owner's cabin at the back, and then some guest accommodation forward. If I move up a size, talking about the Oyster 675, we very much see this boat as our crossover model. And why do I say that? Well, 50% of our owners will sail this boat without any crew. They'll be taking family and friends on board. But the other half, we'll find, do have some crew on board. That may be one crew member, a deckhand, it may be a professional skipper. And the beauty of this model is it has the space to accommodate either of those requirements. So there's different layouts depending on how you're going to sail that boat. Now, it's really when you get up to the next size, we're talking now about the Oyster 745 and the Oyster 885. These boats have been designed with permanent crew in mind. And of course, they you now get both dedicated and separate crew cabins at the forward end of the yacht. Typically, the Oyster 745 would take up to 2 crew in one crew cabin, and the 885 can accommodate up to 4 crew in 2 crew cabins. But the really key thing about these boats is being able to offer that crew separation between crew and owner. And you'll see on the image that's on the screen now, this is looking at the Oyster 745, and that area forward of the saloon leading into the galley. This has a very clever solution of a concealed door and sliding panel that comes out. So that enables you to have that separation. And of course, it's even more important on these longer trips that you're going on to give both you and your family some privacy and separation. But of course, also for the crew, they're going to want their own space and their own time. So as you get to these larger sizes where permanent crew are certainly going to be on board, it's important that you're able to separate these areas out. So the next question is why buy a new yacht for the rally? Well, there are some advantages to buying a new yacht. You're obviously getting the latest model with all the latest features. You're getting the twin rudders, the twin wheels, the bigger cockpits. You're getting improved performance, better storage areas, the signature seascape windows for getting that all-important light in the interior of the yacht. You're getting the newest equipment and electronics fitted, plus the boat will come with all the new boat warranties. But I think one of the real beauties of buying a semi-custom yacht from Oyster is you're able to build something exactly to your own tastes and requirements. You get to choose the wood finish, the upholstery, the layout, the equipment that is fitted. At the end of the day, we are building you a home from home, and we want it to be right. And we can build that boat not only for your plans for a circumnavigation or an Oyster World Rally, but also post circumnavigation. What are you going to do with the boat after that? And of course, building a yacht with Oyster is you get a real deep understanding and knowledge of that boat. You will be guided through that process by one of our really experienced project managers like Debbie, who you'll hear from in a second. And of course, they take you through this build process, and you really get to understand the engineering runs, where the wiring cables go, how all the joinery fits together. So when you are off sailing, it's really key when you start to do some of that maintenance yourself and knowing where everything is. And of course, no one Oyster is the same. Everybody builds them to their own tastes and requirements. So they're all different. And a lot of that comes down to your own personal preferences. Are you, it could be a budget, it could be dependent on the amount of cabins that you need, and also whether you're going to take crew or not. But I think my advice would be to anybody that's looking to buy a new yacht for the rally is to come over to the factory, come to our marinas, get on board the boats and actually get a feel for the space and the size for yourself. And I guess one final quick point from me is, because Oyster don't build any stock boats, all of our boats are built to order because they are so custom. Now, this can take anywhere from 10 months to 15 months in construction, depending on the model. But because we have a fairly full order book, lead times are stretching out from anywhere from the end of 2024 to the end of 2025, depending on the model. So my advice would be to start early, talk to us so we can make sure we deliver the boat to you in good time for your cruising plans. Back to you, Ali.
Thanks very much, Stephen. That was really insightful. Thank you. Don't forget, if you've got any questions, please pop them in the Q&A. We've had quite a few already, which is great. If there's any easy ones that I can answer, then I will straight back to you. But any ones for the panelists, then obviously I'll leave to the end. But now I'd like to hand over to Rupert Knox-Johnston. Hi, Rupert.
Thanks very much, Ali. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Rupert Knox-Johnston. I'm the head of Oyster Brokerage for the UK and Ireland. And I've been selling pre-owned Oyster yachts for more than 20 years, many of which have completed circumnavigations. A little bit about Oyster Brokerage. We are the pre-owned Oyster specialists, established in 1984, and we have offices here in Ipswich, where I'm talking to you from now, Palmer in Mallorca, and Newport, Rhode Island in the USA. We sell the overwhelming majority of pre-owned oysters that change hands every year. Usually have a list of somewhere between 40 and 60 oysters for sale of various ages, specifications, and in a variety of locations. So what is the perfect pre-owned oyster for a circumnavigation? Well, it's really pretty simple, actually. Buy whichever oyster is the perfect one for you. I strongly suggest you try and avoid death by spreadsheet in this and just go out and buy the boat that you love. You'll find the whole experience much more satisfying as a result. About 100 Oyster yachts have circumnavigated already, and they go from 37 to 88 feet long. But it's really interesting to note about 45% of those are made up of just 3 models, the 55, the 56, and the 575. So that really implies there's a sweet spot around the sort of 55 to 58 foot mark. So what should you consider when starting out your search for a pre-owned oyster? Well, the 2 key things, as ever, budget and timing. Firstly, on budget, well, of course, with all other things being equal, a pre-owned oyster is going to be less expensive to buy than a new one. We're listing right now a pretty diverse range of oysters from 45 to 88 feet, with asking prices anywhere from £215,000 up to £3.5 million. But don't forget also to budget not only for all the sort of running costs and maintenance costs that come with any boat, but also crucially for the sort of upgrades that you might need for a round the world rally. I know there's more coming on this specifically later on from Debbie, Gavin and Will. Of course, a really good place to start is a boat that's just completed a round the world trip. They're usually very well sorted. They come very well equipped with lots of spares. And because the owner's been on board pretty much full time, you'll find they are almost ready to go. But it's not always the case. A few years ago, I had a very good client who could have afforded a much younger and more expensive yacht and chose to buy quite an old Oyster 56 because he wanted to do a refit on the boat, spent quite a bit of money doing the refit, was very hands-on and very involved, and he enjoyed every second of it. And at the end, when he went around the world, he had a boat he understood from keel to masthead. So in that case, is exactly what I mean. That was the boat that he loved. Okay, do bear in mind that unlike a new oyster, almost all pre-owned oysters will need a little bit of investment pretty much straight away, and allow time and budget for that. Typically, that would include things like new batteries, new safety gear, servicing of mechanical items, and do please keep receipts and records of all of that for a reason I'll come back to in a minute. On to timing. Well, unlike the new oysters, you can be the proud owner of a pre-owned oyster in about 6 weeks' time if you started tomorrow, in time for the Northern Hemisphere summer. But what I strongly suggest is that you start your search early, keep an eye on the Oyster Brokerage website, follow us on social media, build up an understanding of what's listing and what's selling. Do travel to go and see boats that are available. I can't stress this enough. Come to the various Oyster Brokerage offices, look at as many oysters as possible. It's well worth doing. It's going to be a pretty big investment, so it's really important that you get this right. When you've bought your oyster, same thing applies really. allow time to get to know your boat, at least a season and preferably more. I'd suggest, if you're buying a brokerage boat, that you try and sell the boat as she is without involving yourself in major upgrades straight away. A lot of buyers right now are asking me, should I retrofit a stern thruster, for example, because the new boats have them. Well, if you're really nervous about handling a yacht, why not perhaps invest in a few lessons with a skipper? It'll be a lot cheaper and a lot simpler. So there are ways around these things. Once you're familiar with your yacht, you can then draw up a work list to be completed before you leave on your round the world trip. Typically, that will include things like standing rigging, new sails and things like that, which my colleagues will touch on later. As a final word, it's a difficult thing to think about before you've even started along this road, but have half an eye at least on resale. Keep up with your maintenance routines, keep your records, keep your receipts, and it will pay dividends when you come to sell the boat later on. There's a great little story about one of the first oysters that went around the world on our first rally, and the crew came aboard and disturbed them on what they called Seacock Sunday. So they were running around the boat checking all the seacocks, which they did every week. So great habit to get into. That sort of thing pays big dividends in the end. And that's really all I've got to say. Ali, back to you.
That's fantastic, Rupert. Thanks very much. I'm sure if you're considering buying pre-owned oyster, that's fantastic tips for you. So now we are handing over to Debbie Skugel, who's our lead project manager. Hi, Debbie. How are you?
Thanks, Ali. Great. As well as having circumnavigated myself on an Oyster 55, I've project managed over 70 boats with Oyster. We found the requirements for those planning to circumnavigate aren't a whole lot different from any other Oyster owners. There are three major things that really differentiate a boat for circumnavigating, particularly on the World Rally Tradewind route. The first thing is keeping the boat cool. People don't really appreciate that how much hotter the tropics can be than typical Med or Caribbean conditions. And although, of course, we fit interior blinds as standard, experience from the tropics has shown us that keeping the sun off the decks, the windows and the hatches in the first place really helps keep things cooler on the interior. Rather than fitting big overboomed awnings, we generally advise to fit modular covers that can easily be zipped on. They're much smaller to stow and more easy to use, meaning that you do actually use them rather than having to struggle with a big overboom awning. We build them either in lightweight canvas or in a mesh fabric, which keeps the sun and a surprising amount of rain off the boat, and also allows breeze through the cockpit. Another request to help deal with the heat is to fit cooling fans at every berth instead of just one per cabin, as most owners would do. Because if you're doing a lot of long passages, you're going to find that you've got frequently crew sleeping during the day when it's at the heat's at the hottest. Having a fan at every berth is really appreciated. Number two on the learnings from the World Rally is the choice of tender for getting ashore. Circumnavigators aren't so focused on the ability to wakeboard or tow toys from a big rib with a centre console, and you're much more likely on the World Rally route to have to drag your tender up a beach than tie it to a dinghy dock. So a lighter, smaller rib is generally better. Choosing a tender without a centre console also gives more space for reprovisioning when you're at anchor and for diving and snorkeling expeditions. Some people also find that taking a second small tender is very useful, particularly the bigger boats or people with multiple generations on board. They store a second tender rolled up in the lazarette, and it gives those who want to stay ashore later than their parents a little more independence. The third thing that people choose differently for around the world cruising than they would for normal Mediterranean or seasonal cruising is that you really need to think about the number of crew that you're having on board for your sail choice. So people often take smaller cruising chutes or spinnakers than the ones they'd normally take for or specify for holiday or regatta sailing. Smaller sails are easier to handle short-handed and more likely to be used than a big intimidating kite that needs 4 people to snap it. Also, a big consideration or a common consideration for around the world sailing is a twin headsail type setup that can be reefed or rolled away rather than dropped, and it can therefore be handled easily by one person at night if a sudden squall comes up. That's the major changes from me. I'll take any questions at the end. Back to Ali.
That's great, Debbie. Thanks very much indeed. And we've noticed on this current rally that a lot of owners did change their tenders and also their bimini arrangements to you know, to make sure that they did have that protection against the sun, because the whole Oyster World Rally is a hot rally, so every destination you go to is going to be warm. And also the tender situation, yes, it's much easier to have a smaller tender so that you can run at the beach and nip about quite quickly in. And so these are really great things to, you know, think about if you are circumnavigating. So next we have Gavin Needham, who's our Oyster Technical Support Manager. Hi Gav, how are you?
Yeah, good. Thank you, Ali. I'm going to talk briefly about 5 things to focus on when preparing your boat for a circumnavigation. This is based on my experience, having been technical support out at the stops on the previous 2 Oyster World Rallies and the start of the first one. There are, of course, many points to think about when preparing your boat for the World Rally. But for me, the key thing to base your preparation around is the fact that on a circumnavigation, you won't see many marinas. Therefore, you won't have shore supply or fresh water access for weeks or months even at a time. With this in mind, the main things to focus on are the systems on your boat that are now going to be heavily reliant on. So the first of those being batteries, the heart of your power management system, if you like. If you've got gel or lead acid batteries, then change them before you leave. The industry standard is now lithium ion, which are probably the best option currently available. I think that's fairly common knowledge now. The second one would be generator. Despite the emergence of green charging options, you'll still be very reliant on your generator. So get it checked by a good technician before you leave. Oyster Palmer Service Centre can help arrange this if you're in the Mediterranean, or Oyster Palmer Newport if you're in the USA sort of catchment area. Thirdly, rigging. Have a professional rig check. If there's any doubt about anything, then change it. And carry spares for anything with moving parts, so swivels, blocks, cars, that sort of thing. And then haul out. Get your boat on the hard. Work the seacocks, change the anodes, the cutlass bearings, the rudder bearings, and then have a think about anti-fouling. We have found that the copper coat is a very good option. Again, if you speak to one of our service centres about it, then they can give you some good advice, because it does need to be applied properly. And from the time you decide whichever model is best for you, then be it new or brokerage, then after sales and technical support will be available for you to speak to as and when you need, and will support you throughout your Oyster journey. Ali?
Fantastic, Gav. Thank you very much indeed. And our lessons from this rally is those boats that were prepared, that took on those 5 top tips, were the boats that spent less maintaining their vessels when they arrived in their fantastic destinations, and were able to get off the boats and enjoy where they've actually just sailed to, rather than spending, you know, too much time actually maintaining their boat. So they're really good top tips to, you know, to listen out for. And now our last panelist is Will White. Hi, Will. How are you?
Oh, good. Hello, everybody. Yeah, I'm Will White. I'm the service manager for Oyster in the U.S. I was a yacht skipper for many years, including being the skipper for Oyster's founder, Richard Matthews. And I would just like to talk a little bit about your preparation for the rally, and to reiterate some of the points that my colleagues have made. The basic summary is that the work should happen before you leave. The rally or circumnavigation is a time to maintain your boat, is to keep it moving, to keep it going to the next destination, is to fix things as you need to do it and carry on. It's not a time to be doing a refit while circumnavigating. Sounds pretty obvious, but the more you're prepared in the beginning, the less you're going to have to do as you go around. And when looking at preparing your boat, I think a good place to start is the things that are your absolute most crucial systems. You could argue that the whole boat's a crucial system, but you know, things that you can say are really going to make your life much more difficult. For instance, a fresh water pump. Well, if you don't have fresh water on the boat, that's going to be a problem. An anchor. Well, what if you lose your anchor? Maybe you need 2 anchors or 3 anchors. Autopilot, that's another one a lot of our people are very reliant on. So if there's one thing you want to have a lot of spares for, it's autopilot. You want to have basically the whole entire autopilot ready to be replaced if need be. And as Debbie was pointing out, a tender, a small beachable tender is good, and a spare tender is not a terrible idea either, because once again, if you lose your tender, if it's not tied on correctly or it sinks or something, that can also make your trip a little bit more of a hassle if now you're looking to purchase a tender in some foreign location. And then as far as the general layout of the boat and your sail choice and things all the way to your choice of a toolkit that you carry, a lot of those are relying on what's the skill level of the people that are sailing the boat. If you don't want to leave the cockpit very much and you don't want to do a lot of sail changes, then you don't need to carry an elaborate sail inventory. You know, it sounds obvious, but those are the things to consider, and probably also to consider when looking at the boat. Does the layout of the boat and the equipment on the boat match the ability of the people that want to do the trip? So I think those are the way you have to approach it, is to say, is this a boat that I or my crew or me and my friends can maintain? Is this a boat that's kept to the level that we're ready to keep it at? And I think when the boat and the crew all match together, that's really a very good fit and a good recipe for success. And I think that's it. We'll look forward to the questions.
That's great. Well, thanks ever so much. And thank you to all our panelists this evening. We've had quite an active chat, question and answer box, so I have been busy typing away, answering the ones that I can. And I'd like to now take some of those questions and invite the panel to answer them. Firstly, I've got one probably for Stephen. Hopefully it's an easy one to answer. And this is from Philip and also from Simon, is where is the best place to see the new models of Oysters?
Yeah, sure. Okay, well, obviously, if you can, a great way to really see and understand the boats is to come to the factory. All our factories are located in the UK. And at the factories, you'll get to see the boats, or variety of boats in different stages of build. So it'll really help you understand how the boats are built sort of behind the scenes. And we also have a number of finished boats in our marinas. So of course, you're very welcome to come to our marinas here in the UK and look over some finished boats. If that isn't possible for you, of course, we have boats all over the world. So you know, main locations that we'll find our boats are in the Med. A lot of the boats are in Palma, over in the US. But of course, these boats are owned already, and so we have to ask our very kind owners to get you on board. But we will always try and accommodate as best we can. But as I say, probably the best way to see them, especially now, actually in our marina sitting next to me, we've got 2565s, 2595s, 675, 745. We've got 2495s in our marina in Southampton. So there's plenty to see here in the UK if you're able to visit.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Stephen. And also we have a question from Oscar. Oscar is asking, what is the benefit of an extended transom for storage for the rally? Debbie, is that something that you feel comfortable answering?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's a good option for a rally for storage. I mean, I would always counter against just cramming an extended transom full of stuff, which is what people tend to do with any storage space they've got. You know, it does weigh heavily at the aft end of the boat. There's plenty of storage on a normal Oyster. You know, the 565 and up has a set. Well, in fact, 4952, they all have good sail lockers forward for storing sails, fenders, and then, you know, a big lazarette aft. So I wouldn't say you have to have an extended transom for cruising, but it does add more storage space, undoubtedly.
Okay, thanks very much, Debbie. We've got a couple of questions on sails, as in those white things that we have at the front of the boat. Will, I wonder if you would be happy to answer these questions. So the first one is, what are the pros and cons of having a roller furling mainsail for longer passages?
I think the pros are that You can reef it easily. You can reef it easily from the cockpit. You can reef it off the wind or on the wind. You don't have to round up to do it necessarily, because you can depower the sail by easing the outhaul. So you can keep the boom almost in the same position and just ease the outhaul a lot, and that creates enough, that depressures the main enough to furl it. So I would say those are the advantages. The disadvantage, like a lot of labor saving equipment, is that it then makes it a little more complicated system in terms of the mechanics and the maintenance involved in it. But I will say this, that the one thing I would say about the roller furling main is that most of our owners who had an Oyster with a roller and furling main, when they reorder their next Oyster, they once again have the same main. So they seem to like it and vote for it by going down that same path again. So that's it.
Okay, great. And the other sales question was this from Chuck, and Chuck asks, considering the downwind nature of the route of the rally, did any boats not use a spinnaker pole for hoisting their spinnaker, instead favouring furling spinnakers?
We have most of the boats went with a furling spinnaker or a snuffing asymmetric. We don't have too many people using symmetrical spinnakers, and the more modern sail plan seems to be much more geared towards the asymmetrics. A spinnaker pole, especially with the older boats, is very practical for pulling out the headsail, but you have to consider that it needs to be a fairly high cut headsail to pull it out effectively, and the boat kind of has to have the sail plan designed for that. So an older model, you would say, definitely would want a spinnaker pole and would quite possibly be happy with a symmetrical spinnaker. The more modern boats, with their shape and their rig plan, are much more geared towards asymmetrics and no spinnaker.
Great. Many thanks for that. And now a question for Gavin, I think. Michael is asking about the risk of lithium batteries, and there's been a few incidents recently of them catching fire. What do Oyster do to mitigate those risks?
I think that is one of those, you get what you pay for with in that sort of scenario. We use a specific brand, so we stick with the Mastervolt ones, and they have the inbuilt protection. So if they're too hot, they're too cold, they're overcharged, they're undercharged, they're getting low state of charge, they will cut themselves off. Basically, they've just got lots of safety systems built into them that you don't have to worry about. They're just there. So we, touch wood, have never had, and I don't think Mastervolt have either, had a problem with their lithium-ion batteries.
Okay, cool, thank you. And a question maybe Rupert can help us with. Somebody's asking if they were to buy a pre-owned Oyster for the rally and it hadn't done the rally before, what sort of budget should they be looking for to refit it, ready to go in the rally? Realise obviously this is a reasonably difficult question to answer because every boat's different, but maybe if you had a ballpark figure, or you could just explain the sort of things that you'd be looking at.
Gosh, that really is a piece of string question. I mean, it can be done quite economically if you're disciplined about it and you don't want to spend an absolute fortune. It can be done quite simply. Having said that, I think, as I tried to say earlier, there are a number of things you're going to have to do. I mean, I think standing rigging and new sails before you set off, I think, is a minimum. Clearly, servicing and that sort of thing is time well spent and money well spent. But I wouldn't necessarily go into it with a massive shopping list. I think you can. I think give yourself a run up is the key answer to this question. Sail the boat for a season, get used to it, see if you really need the things that you think you need, and then you compare it back from that. If you have no or fewer budgetary limitations, of course, you can go as far as you want and make the whole experience extremely comfortable. Okay,
that's great, thank you. I've got a question about insurance, which I'm very happy to answer. Somebody's asking the question, is it easy to get insurance for a circumnavigation? And the answer to that is there's not that many companies that do offer insurance to sail around the world, whether it's on the Oyster World Rally or another event or just circumnavigating on your own. And it is down to each individual insurance company as to what qualifications or experience they expect the owner, if you're the owner skipper or your driver or your professional skipper, must have. So it is down to, you know, experience and knowledge. And as I said, every insurance company does have different regulations for that. But I would say as a minimum, it's normally our way, a yacht master practical certificates, plus, you know, making sure that you're fully up to speed with things such as your medical, your sea survival, and making sure that you have your own VHF license and that sort of thing. So again, every single insurance company will ask for different things. On the World Rally, for example, we obviously do make sure that you are insured before you start. That is very, very important. And we do have a minimum amount of skill experience level plus certification and qualifications that we ask you for, because we want to make sure that everybody who starts the rally finishes it and that everybody is capable and skillful enough to do that. So that's where we stand on the Oyster World Rally. Okay, another question is, let me just see, maybe I could send this to Stephen. What is the average size of a yacht that sails on the Oyster World Rally?
I think history has shown us over the last couple of rallies that the typical boat size doing that rally is anywhere between 50 and 60 feet as a whole. But obviously the rally caters for yachts from 45 feet and above, and we have smaller boats doing it all the way up to Oyster 885s doing it. So there is a variety of boats in the rally fleet, but I think if you actually narrow down to what are the most common models doing it, it is, I would say, between the 50 to 60 foot range.
That's fantastic. Thanks very much, Stephen. And unfortunately, another question for you. Jonathan is asking, is there a range or does the new 495 and the 595, are they able to be built specified specifically for the rally?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, all of our boats are built and designed for long distance blue water cruising. So I think that's the first thing. The actual customization part of it will very much depend on your particular cruising plan. So both of those boats, yes, very much can be specified for long distance blue water cruising. So the kind of things that you would add on top of perhaps the standard for doing a rally is things like water makers, if you're wanting to fit solar panels, hydro generators. On the 495, you'll be fitting things like a diesel generator as well. So absolutely, those two boats, no problem in fitting those out for long distance cruising.
Okay, fantastic. And a question I'm very happy to answer is from Alexander. He's asking, how many yachts are typically involved in the Oyster World Rally? Historically, we've always had between 25 and 30 yachts that have started each rally, and we're well on track for those numbers on the next rally in 2024, and we already have 24 yachts already signed up for the 2026 rally. So we can comfortably take 30 yachts around the world. Anything over than that, we tend to not really want to go further, because when we get to some of the remote islands in the South Pacific and French Polynesia, such as the Tuamotus or the Society Islands, if we have a big fleet of boats all descending on a lovely remote beautiful island, it sort of takes away from that. So we try to be really respectful to where the rally route goes, and so we basically put a cap on the rally at about 30. So I hope that answers your question, Alexander. And we have another one for Stephen. Is roughly how much does an oyster cost?
Okay, well, obviously it depends on the model that you're looking at, but just to quickly run you through perhaps the base prices of the yachts. The Oyster 495 base price is £1.375 million. That's all these prices are excluding VAT and any options you put on top. When you go to the 565, That's 2.195, excluding that. The 595 is 2.495. The 675 is 3.195. The 745 is 4.5 million. And the 885 is 7.5 million. So that's roughly the price of the boat. But typically you're obviously going to customize those boats, personalize them to your own taste and requirements. And that can vary from anything from perhaps 10% on the bigger boats going up to sort of 20% on the 495, something like that. I hope that helps.
That's great. Thanks very much, Stephen. And I've got a question. Maybe I could ask Will to answer this one. It's basically asking a question on the 595. Is it practical to take a full-time crew member on a boat?
I think that a very common configuration on the World Rally and what we've seen in the past is a couple that owns the boat, and then they have one paid crew member with them. And that role of that crew member can vary depending on the needs of the people. It can be from a skipper on board to a young guy or girl that's, you know, with some moderate experience who's there to help out. But I think that having another crew member on board on a 595 would be really normal. And I think you'd find that in that size range, probably 50% of the people have a paid hand of some kind.
Okay, fantastic. And I think I can add a little bit to that. We've got we had a 595 on part of this first Oyster World Rally, and we had a full-time skipper and a part-time mate on that boat, and the mate came on board when there was longer passages. So it is practical. It just depends really, you know, what you as an owner of the Oyster would like. So you know, it is down to personal preference as well. Cool. So let's see another question for you. This is a question from Fintan about autopilots. Maybe Gavin, this might be a good question for you. Do you need a second autopilot on an Oyster?
It's always good to carry spares, as Will touched on. So I think in the recommended spares, you will, you know, it's sensible to take another autopilot motor or RAM and probably a head unit. Whether you have that permanently fixed in, I don't think you need to. In this day and age, they're so almost plug and play. They're just something that you have ready to do. I'm not saying you're gonna use them, but as Will said as well, you know, if you've got a long passage coming up and your autopilot fails, it's going to spoil your day. So it's just one of those things that you would take with you, but maybe not hardwired in as such.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. I'm just trawling through. We've had tons of questions. This is quite an interesting one again. It's about preparing in advance for the rally, and there's a question about shore power requirements and adapter plugs at each port. Again, I'm quite happy to answer this question. Basically, most places you go to will have different electricity on the pontoon. So it is advisable to purchase before a circumnavigation a pack which has lots of different adapters that will work around the world. And the thing that you don't want to happen is you're coming off from a long passage, you come into the marina and you get out your shore power and you've got no way of actually accessing that shore power. And it's one of the most frustrating things. So best advice is to always carry loads of adapters if you're sailing around the world. And if you're an Oyster owner, you can buy a pack from Oyster After Sales, and they have one ready and waiting, and it works really well. Okay, I think we'll just take a couple more questions. I've got one about carbon fibre masts. Do we think that carbon fibre masts are a good thing for sailing around the world, or sticking to aluminium? What do you think, Rupert?
Hi, yeah, well, this is an idea that's been coming for some time. I think clearly you can save a huge amount of weight aloft if you go down the carbon route. I think they are a lot better as well than they used to be. More than the only disadvantage, of course, is the cost. I mean, they are an expensive option. There's no question about that. Interesting, we just had an Oyster 655 come in here for some service work, and he had a black carbon rig and decided to, when he came back in, to paint it white, because they can get very hot, and it was causing some issues with the varnish on there, so the clear coat. So yeah, look, there are big advantages. It will improve the motion. It is obviously lighter, a lot lighter, but of course it comes at a premium, no question about that.
Okay, that's great. Thanks very much. A question for Debbie. As a project manager, obviously you must get lots of questions about what certain things on the boat will be better than something else. Somebody's asking about electric cookers versus gas cookers on a circumnavigation.
Yeah, electric cookers actually in the last couple of years have become much more popular. GNS Bass that we use to fit our standard gas cookers on Oysters now have produced a halogen gas electric cooker, which makes it a lot more feasible for electric cooking. Benefits of electric is that you get less heat in the boat from, obviously you're not burning gas. Some people don't like carrying gas on board as a safety risk, although we haven't, I don't think, ever had any issues with Oyster with safety with the gas installation. There's the benefit of not having to go ashore and find gas. I guess the only real downside of the electric is that you then are really reliant on your generator. If that fails, then you have no backup for making a cup of tea. Whereas, with gas, it is a secondary source of power. So pros and cons, but electric is becoming more popular in the newer boats.
That's great, Debbie, thank you. And something I can add to that is on the World Rally, not every destination will you be able to refill gas bottles. So you have to be quite careful and, know in advance where you can. So that's just one sort of thing to think about if you do have gas on board. As I said, not every destination can you refill them. And interestingly enough, Australia is one of the destinations that it can be quite difficult. Okay, so I think we'll just take one more question, and which one should we go for? I think maybe back to Debbie, actually. It's about solar panels. Is that something that you can add at the build stage of the boat? Is that something that you retrofit afterwards?
Yeah, just in the last year, actually, we've come up with a very nice solution for fitting solar panels during build stage. We can fit them now onto canvas bimneys. So we can get 6 on maximum generally, and they just Velcro nicely onto top of the bimini. It does look very elegant. They're easily removable should you need to take the bimini down, but the idea would be to leave them there for the whole of the circumnavigation.
Cool, fantastic. And one last question that I know I can answer, so that's an easy one. Someone's just asked us what the average speed is on the Oyster World Rally. It's a question we get quite often, and obviously it does really depend on the Oyster model that you have. Theoretically, the bigger boat that you have, the quicker you will sail. But we sort of average the rally on between 7 and 8 knots when we're looking at the actual time it takes to sail between destinations. But we obviously are aware that the smaller boats will take a little longer, the bigger boats a little less. So we try to make sure that we maximise the opportunities in each destination for all the owners to have as much time as we can practically give them in the timescale that we have in the rally. And just sort of the reason why the rally takes 16 months and not any longer is that we have to keep ahead of the weather. So we make sure the route is always ahead of the weather systems, and that we keep that in mind when we're choosing how long we stay in each destination and when we start the rally and when we conclude it. And we always start the rally in January and finish back in Antigua in April. So that's 16 months. Well, thank you very much indeed, everyone, for joining us this evening. I hope you found it insightful, and we've answered lots of your questions. But if you have any more or want to contact us, please do so at worldrallye@oysteryachts.com, and also visit our website. There's tons of information on there, including everything about buying an oyster, buying a pre-owned oyster, about the World Rally. You can see where the boats are at the moment. They're just heading up the Caribbean to the finish in Antigua, and also all about the next rally in 24 and the next one after that. So there's lots of information on there, but please don't hesitate to email us if you've got a question that we haven't answered and you really want it to be, we're very happy to help. So once again, thank you very much to our panelists, and I hope everybody has enjoyed the evening. Thank you very much. Good night.